Hello, and welcome to the Shifting Culture podcast, in which we have conversations about the culture we create and the impact we can make. I'm your host, Joshua Johnson. Go to shiftingculturepodcast.com to interact or donate. If you're enjoying this podcast, don't forget to hit the follow button and to get new episodes as soon as they are released. And leave a rating or review and let your friends and network know about the show. Previous guests on the show have included Sarah Brule, Meredith Johnson, and Onia Okuwabi. You can go back and listen to those episodes and more. But today's guest is Anne Grizzle. Anne is the chaplain at Boys Home of Virginia, mentors with Leighton Ford Ministries, and leads retreats on spiritual direction and strength for the journey. We talk about spending time with God and have a conversation around the importance of listening to God and to one another. I know you'll enjoy this conversation with Anne Grizzle. Anne, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining us.
I'm so glad to be here, Josh. It's wonderful to see what conversation we can have today.
Yeah, I know that my wife Meredith has been in a mentoring group with you for many years, and she loves hearing from you, learning from you, being able to engage with you, and so I'm excited that I get the privilege now, and it's not just Meredith that gets it.
It's a whole family affair, and we have learned to find people that we can trust and speak our hearts with and be vulnerable with, and it has held her and me and all of us for the long haul in our work.
Yeah, and I think, for Meredith, that is one of the things that's helped root her and ground her as she walks through ministry challenges and life challenges throughout her life. She's been rooted with this group of women that have really been there for each other and has been focused on Jesus along the way, which has been a big blessing. What are some things that have rooted you and anchored you throughout your life when challenges start to come?
Great question. I always go back to John 15, abiding in the vine.
Yeah.
And I can sometimes get so busy responding to needs and people and urgencies, and I have had to develop a rhythm of abiding. And at different seasons, that rhythm was different. How much time and how I could make time. For me, it was a lot of it was in sort of silence and quiet and the sort of being with, not performing for God, where I needed to go and soak, almost like a solar panel, and be recharged before I went out. And it was sort of learning when in my own soul, the power's getting low, sort of like on my computer or my phone, like this power's getting low and I better go back to the source and plug it in and make that space just daily in the morning. I mean, I love to get up in the quiet and actually be, or as the watchman waits for morning. So waits, just the waiting. And also the rhythms of big times away, like Meredith, our group, we have a yearly come away time. And I have a yearly time, actually twice a year, that I come away for my own personal retreat, time with God, to re-anchor, refresh, restore. And if I have that and keep that, both the daily and something like the weekly and the yearly rhythm, it helps. So time with God. And then the second is time with other people who you can really trust and be vulnerable with.
Yeah. And it seems really important to have those rhythms as we go out. Oftentimes, for me, sometimes I think that there's this dichotomy of this abiding place and the quiet and solitude, and then this ministry activity where I am supposed to be busy with all of the things and to perform well. And it seems like that. How then does those rhythms inform ministry and the way that ministry is done in your life?
Mm-hmm. Um, I find that if I don't have enough of the go away, like Jesus
Yeah.
did, slip away time, the quality of my ministry and my work, and I've done a lot of counseling and chaplaincy work, and I'm not as present to people.
Hmm.
You can tell when somebody's got a little light in their eyes and a little energy, and they have a heart that's alert, and you can tell when they're weary.
Yeah.
And so if I get my rhythm right, I know that other people will comment on, oh, that was so helpful. You're
Hmm.
so present to me. And if not, I'll come away from the day and and it will not be very full of life for me or for other people. So
Hmm.
the other reason I need to get away is I find that wisdom for decisions, or if I'm, for example, speaking, if I'm
Yeah.
asked to speak, I can always come up with a speech or a preach or something off the top of my head.
Yeah.
But if I take time away, I have enough time to listen
Hmm.
for the voice of the good shepherd. I have to listen for maybe what the Spirit is speaking,
Yeah.
listen for what listeners need. And so the message that I speak is different if I've taken time to do some listening myself.
Hmm. Yeah, that's
So it's that
powerful.
rhythm.
Yeah, it's
Mm-hmm.
the rhythm of listening, and oftentimes, I know in some circles, oftentimes if we engage in spiritual disciplines, or we engage in prayer, or we engage in our abiding times, in some circles that prayer time is us talking to God, and we don't take that time to listen to Him. Right? It's that I'm just going to throw everything to Him, and the majority of our time with Him should be spent, well, in my opinion, should be spent in listening and being with. Um, and so, what are some of the tools or some things that you have found in your life to start to slow down and quiet yourself enough where we can actually hear God, listen to
Mm-hmm.
Him, and be with Him in those moments?
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say first that the image I like to think about is relationship. Or I've been married for over 40 years, and I think about, and I've done a lot of family counseling. And, when you take a course on relationship, the first thing that they'll tell you is the key to relationship is listening. And you have in the making room for the other person, not just the speaking, but the listening. Now,
Yeah.
the problem comes with God is, I mean, it's harder to hear the voice of God.
Yep.
It's not usually audible, and it's not knocking us off to our feet like he did with Saul. So it requires some waiting, which is not an American thing.
Yeah.
I mean, we're used to have it your way and quick.
Yep.
And so the waiting, the sitting, the listening, when we're listening for a still small voice,
Hmm.
as opposed to the input we're so used to
Yeah.
with our phones and with social media. And so I have had to cultivate those quiet times. I mean, first, just to give myself permission that I don't have to even
Yeah.
be praying for people all the time and go down my
Yeah.
prayer list and tell God what He needs to do. And then I remind myself, well, the Almighty, the creator of the heavens and earth, actually knows. And I say Jesus is interceding. So I go, well, let me listen for what
Hmm.
maybe God is about, which is not always my first
Yeah.
prayer request, because I tend to think what I know what God should do. So it's the listening that um, soothes the soul, but
Yeah.
gives some input. I've also it's really not natural to
Hmm.
sit in silence.
Yeah.
You've been in a worship time, and they said we're going to take a minute of silence. If you time that, I mean, you're lucky to get 10 seconds.
Yep.
It's not easy, and it's not easy for us
Yeah.
because the you have the outside noise, but then you have all the the ancient Christians called it the monkeys in the trees. I mean, what did I have for lunch? Or what about the email I forgot? Or, oh, I should think about this. And so there is a discipline of sitting and focusing. I like to just focus on Jesus, but you could also have a word Abba or Nata or peace, and to actually put our mind on what we want to focus on. Psalm 27, one thing have I desired of the Lord, that will seek after to behold the beauty of the Lord, to put our mind on something, and then try to focus and maybe use our breathing and just be present. Of course, within a minute or 2 or 5 seconds, something else pops into our minds.
Yeah.
And one of my mentors said, don't beat yourself up when that happens. Just gently let it go. And it just gives you another opportunity to choose God and to put your mind back. But that takes some cultivating.
Yeah.
We aren't trained to do that, but once we get a taste of it, it's got a lot of fruit, not just in that time of listening, but I think in later, because it sort of grounds us in a different way of being, where we're operating out of a source of love rather than reacting to the needs of the day.
Yeah, and it seems to me if I don't take space like that for me, and I is not on top of my mind, and I'm not mindful in the midst of that, I am definitely reacting out of my desire to make sure that, personally, my desire to make sure that I can control things and things are not going awry. Like I will be able to fix it. I will get angry if I don't have enough quiet and space where I could listen. There's all sorts of things that go awry. And it's mainly reacting and me trying to control instead of actually surrendering to God. And so, as we then move into the space of being with others and the cares of the day start to creep in, what are some rhythms or things during the day that can bring us back to that place of rootedness and grounded in a space of listening and being with God in our situation and in our day?
Mm-hmm. Good question. I know my husband, when he was right in the middle of a really big corporate environment that was highly pressured, would actually set his alarm for like 2 p.m. and it would go off like, where am I? Am I frazzled? Am I hassled? Or am I grounded?
Yeah.
And so I think having a few anchor points in the day, sometimes, it could be an alarm. If you're in a monastery, there's a bell, but it could be even when you open the computer or when you hold your phone, you could say, let me take a breath. Let me pray, Lord, fill me with your peace, re-anchor me. So I think it can help to have a few of the normal things of the day connected to an anchoring, centering, grounding. It could be when you go to get a glass of water. It could be when you walk out the door. And I think physical walking, being in nature, sometimes just standing up, moving our body. For me, I can get into a sort of headspace that feels like I've had one too many emails or calls. And so getting up and moving my body, ideally, even if it's one walk around the block and seeing something green, or even in the winter, getting a whiff of cool air, that can remind me and remind me that there is a larger creator, and give me a perspective when the news of the day or the pains of the people I'm talking to are so heavy and real.
Yeah.
But I don't want, I need to to get re-anchored in a larger source that can help me to carry that.
Mm. Even when Meredith goes for your going away time and you're sitting at your property, you've created a space there where there's a lot of places in that space on that property that remind you of God, that point you to Him, and give you that sense of groundedness. How important is it for us to order our physical space around us and to have some points of connection to God?
Well, I find it helpful mainly because we're people of remembrance.
Mm.
So if I create a space, even if it's a particular chair that I sit in,
Mm-hmm.
if I get a candle or my Bible or a little quote, or I have something that's there, or maybe a little something, a rock that showed up that reminds me of God's goodness.
Mm.
If I go back to that same place, it's easier for me to get to the grounded place and the prayerful place, because it's a little like that old experiment of Pavlov's dog, where the dog would come in and they would feed the dog and he'd start to salivate, and then the dog would start to salivate even when there wasn't food there, because it was the place they were familiar. And I find spiritually, if I create a place in my home, a closet, at one place I did have a closet. I know a friend who does a closet, but just a particular chair, or I'll oftentimes find a place with a view outside, even if it's a little tiny view. Or at the Belfry, our place, of course, I've created places of particular beauty. And I like to go away periodically for longer times in those places. So I think every listener probably has some magnificent place or some place for their own soul is that sort of place that you can go occasionally. And you might have a place that you can go sometimes in your city, in your neighborhood, a park, a bench, a church pew, a chapel, and then in your own home, a spot. And I personally find that helps me remember and go back to that anchored place more quickly. And just simply by having the physical. I mean, we have a God who became incarnate. There's something about the physicality that we're very physical people.
Yes.
And breath, breath and a mind. We can always remember something. It can be a poem. It can be the daffodils. We can also mentally take ourselves someplace. Of remembrance of God's goodness, of the sky at night, whatever.
Yeah, that's so good. As that we take this place, I'd love to then figure out a way that, as we encounter others and we engage in, maybe evangelism, or we engage in people that are far from God and that need an orientation to start to face Him and walk with Him. How can we take this and work holistically with people that are far from God?
Well, I honestly think this idea of presence, if we can be present to God, like Mary with just the one thing that was needed, it cultivates an ability to be present to other people. I think everyone has experienced something of a person who looked at you and listened to you like they really cared about you, and then took the time to behold you and listen to what was on your heart and mind. And that's what we want to give to people. I think if we, in the same way that Jesus would see people and listen to people, that sense of presence. So whoever we're with, even if we have a day full of many people, or we have a congregation where we're meeting many people at the end of a service, that even 5 seconds with a person, or 50 minutes or more, the quality of presence I think conveys a deep sense of love and
Mm.
healing,
Yeah.
really, and encouragement to blossom and to
Mm.
grow.
Yeah.
And if we hear and see who a person is, that will help us in evangelism or speaking the good
Mm.
news, because we'll know what applies to them.
Yeah.
What piece of good news is it that their particular circumstances or heart is needing?
Right.
So that listening presence, Leighton Ford, who Meredith and I, both he started these mentoring groups. So it's
Yeah.
really good about that. I remember him listening to, I think he was going to give a retirement speech for a pastor who pastored for so many years, and he got together with him before he put together his own remarks, and he just listened to him.
Mm.
Tell me about your life. Well, tell me about the journey. Tell me about the turning points. And he listened to him for an hour or two.
Mm.
And at the end, the pastor said, Leighton, I don't know if there's anybody listened to me
Mm.
that fully for I don't know how long.
Mm.
And so I think that is a gift. And when you've heard a person's story,
Yeah.
you have a much better idea of what piece of good news is going to be good for them.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so helpful. I mean, we often have, prepackaged good news that we think is going to be good news for the person in front of us. But even a lot of us say, "Oh, John 3:16 is good news," but it's not good news for the Buddhists. That God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, that whoever believes in Him will not perish but have everlasting life. The Buddhist is saying, "I want to get out of this circular reincarnation of a life." And so if that's our first good news to a Buddhist, that doesn't make any sense to them whatsoever. So really cultural intelligence is important, and not just cross-cultural as like, hey, I live in America and I'm talking about, Thai Buddhists somewhere. I'm talking about, even in my marriage, which is cultural intelligence, right?
It's a cross-cultural experience,
It
right,
is.
Josh?
It's a cross-cultural experience.
Marriage is a cross-cultural experience.
I know. So
It's
every
it's
relationship.
it's the great love opportunity of the learning, the training ground, and
Yeah.
not all of us have a lot of learning to do.
We have a lot of learning to do. A lot of learning, and so it's in that little space that I have to figure out, all right, I have to dig deeper into Meredith and figure out what is good news for her, and what is her real struggle. What's lying underneath the pain that she's feeling, or the masks that she is wearing, and to figure out what is good news. And most of it is listening. And I found that if I tell her what is good news for her, it doesn't work out so well. But if I help her discover what is good news and the pain point that she is feeling, then we actually have a fruitful conversation. And I think that is with a lot of people, as we're helping them uncover what it is that they are feeling, and what it is they can start to articulate a need, and then Jesus can meet them in that need. How can we do that well, to help people uncover what is really the need and good news for them?
I think of Isaiah 50. It says, "The Lord wakens me morning by morning, wakens my ear to listen, so that I may know how to give a word of healing." So I think a lot of it is, there is asking questions. Jesus asked a lot of questions
Yeah.
when people came to him, and he, what is it you want? What do you seek? Who are you?
Mm-hmm.
And so as he did, I think also it's the looking at the face of the other person, because as you see what sparks their curiosity or their perhaps tears or joy, we can go into that And then we also, if we throw something out, whether it's a
Mm.
story or a word, we can see how they respond. Is that something that they respond to with a welcomeness or with a tightening up? And we can pay attention
Mm.
to the person that we're caring for,
Yeah.
and that will guide us in the conversation to see what opens a person up,
Mm.
rather than closes them down.
Yeah.
Because very few people are going to receive something good if they're closed up.
Mm-hmm.
So it's how do we become people that are listeners and are welcoming enough for people to trust us to share.
So yeah, so how do we do that with people, that are suspicious of church insiders and that they're closed off, and we want to go and actually welcome people, love people, and open them up in a way where we can have fruitful conversation?
Mm-hmm. I mean, most people, if you start off with saying, tell me something about your story, they can start at whatever point, however deep or shallow
Yeah.
they want. Tell me a little bit about your story, or tell me a little about your family, or, what's a story from your own experience, or a question, what's your passion? What's something you really enjoy? And so if we can offer a question that's open enough that most anybody will welcome it as an interest. Not you don't want to be interrogating, but as something that like, I'm interested in you. And even with church, I think you can say, gosh, a lot of people have had really tough experiences church. What's been your experience?
Yeah.
It says, look, I understand there might be some hard things and hurtful things, and it's like, I'd like to hear about those. I'm sorry that happened to you, or what were you looking for, or what is it you're looking for now?
Yeah.
So that it turns from our prescriptive answers to hearing what they're hungry for.
Yeah. It seems to me that I think we often go through a journey in our life where we want the prescriptive answers, and we want answers, and we go through a phase where we actually come to the realization that we actually don't know all the answers, and that we have to hold things with an open hand, and we start to figure out what Jesus was doing, and really try to imitate Jesus and walk in his shoes to the people around us. And we have, this journey of early life and, midlife and late life that I think a lot of people follow and fall into. But for some people that are early on in their stage, and are holding on tight to methodology or something where this is the way it is, this is the way it has to be. What are some tips that you could give to people in those early stages, where they may be able to move through these stages a little quicker? And I don't know if you actually can. Maybe you just need time in your life. But what are some things that people can do to start to open themselves up a little bit with their hands open?
Yeah, I think that, well, when we're excited about something, we want to tell everybody. I mean, my favorite flavor of ice cream, I mean, something new came out. So it's a pretty normal thing when you have that experience with God that you want to tell everybody about it. And figure everybody must like it the way you like it.
Yeah.
So I think that's natural. And again, my best sense is to, a little like Jesus, pay attention to the other person. Look at them, see them, and so that it's a little like, it's a dance, it's a back and forth, so that we're gearing our interaction with somebody to their response.
Mm.
I've been on the street. We're in DC a lot.
Yeah.
On the street, and you might have a street preacher who will just say the same thing and have no response to who's walking by. And then there are other people who engage people and are interactive. And so I think it's the piece of having interaction beyond ourselves to the other person, and how we can make it more of that conversation that opens us both up, and that we both, that we all learn together. Something I recall Meredith doing such a beautiful job with our group. We oftentimes will share different ways of that we share the gospel or interact with people. And this was when I think you all were in Jordan, and she was telling stories to Muslim women, and she taught us, and we did a storytelling method. So we took scripture, but it was a story. It wasn't a "thus saith the Lord," the word of the Lord from the Holy Scripture of the Christian Bible. It was like, there's this story of these followers of Jesus being in a boat, and there's a storm, and they're so afraid. And she had each of us take one piece of the story and learn to tell the story. And it was so interactive and so gentle that everybody took the story in. Stories are just such a great way. I mean, Jesus told a lot. So telling a story, even if it's a story from our own life or asking for a story, I think stories really engage people and loosen people up for real relationship.
You mentioned Leighton Ford a little bit ago, and you do a lot of work with Leighton in the mentoring realm and mentoring groups. And he went from having a very large public ministry into big stadium events, and went into mentoring. What does that look like for him? But specifically, what does that look like for you, and why did you want to get in on the mentoring game, and why do you think it's so important?
Yes, I believe Jesus had 12 disciples, and it's turned the world around 2,000 years later. So I do think that a deep, ongoing relationship sometimes with fewer number of people that transform their lives and invest in them over time can make a huge difference. One of the things we did with Leighton Ford Ministries is invite Christians to look down a generation. And it might be you're 40, and so you're looking down to 30. It might be 32, and you're looking down to 20. It might be 70, and it's 60 or 40. But to think of somebody and look at the people where you can see the Spirit on them. You can see they have a heart for God. They have a heart to make a difference in this world. And then to be willing to come alongside and to encourage them and to believe in them, not to be, for me, it's not so much, and Leighton, it's not to be a Leighton or to be an Anne, but it's to see a person that God's uniquely made with their particular gifts and enable that to blossom and to grow. And I know that for Leighton, he moved from large programs or events to really investing in people. And I have always had a heart for investing in people. And also have a sense that there are sometimes I run across people who are like, Meredith, like, that one is mine. And we have that as parents, this is my child. But I believe there's a larger call for mothering, for fathering, for mentoring, for encouraging, sistering. Oh, this one is mine, because there's it might be a particular ethnicity or country of the world. That's mine. I have a kinship
Mm.
somehow. It might be a person who suffered. I have a sister who had a long cancer bout. Well, somebody who has suffered, I'm like, I can journey. That one's
Mm.
mine to journey with.
Yeah.
And I think we look around and say, who are those few that we want to invest in more heavily?
Mm.
And it doesn't mean we don't. Many of us have ministries or work that engages lots of people.
Yeah.
But along the way, there's sometimes a person like, this one is mine. Like Jesus said,
Mm.
I'm going to call you.
Yeah.
Um, and um, and over time, I think that investment multiplies because none of us
Mm.
will live forever.
Yeah.
And if we can invest in people who then are investing in others, I think that
Mm.
is how the seed grows
Yeah.
and the wheat becomes a field, and the even the dandelions blow and cover the earth,
Mm.
and the good things sprout.
Yeah.
So it starts oftentimes with that one human interaction.
Yeah. It's said that there is a definite need for mothers and fathers in the Lord, so mothering and fathering. And so, what does it look like to become a mother or father in the Lord and take on that role with others?
Uh, well, I mean, the first is availability and a willingness to invest beyond yourself, beyond your immediate biological family, and to realize there are other children, there are other kingdom bearers, God bearers to invest in. And then, my experience has been, well, even with the mentor group, I thought, I think I'm called to do an international group, but I'm not sure who. And it took me a little while
Mm.
to identify who are the people I wanted to invite to come together.
Yeah.
And then when I did, I specifically said, come away,
Mm.
come away. And we've done it for over a decade. Come away for time to really listen, to eat, to walk, to be, to pray together. And I probably every one of us, Josh, has spiritual sons and daughters and nephews and nieces, or people that we're called to take on
Yeah.
and be that person.
Mm.
I oftentimes, some of the people that I believe I've been called to mother
Yeah.
more are people who with great talent, great love of God, but maybe who didn't have that
Mm.
in the natural for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And so they're particularly receptive.
Mm.
And even in the mentoring, I will sometimes look for people who are hungry for that kind of growing.
Yeah.
Maybe they've actually had it in the natural, but they're hungry for that.
Yeah.
So wouldn't it be great? I mean, we just passed Mother's Day, and
Yeah.
I mean, there'll be Father's Day to realize. At our church, the pastor said on this card, write your mother, biological, but the other people who've mothered you
Mm.
as a verb, not just a noun,
Yeah.
and
Mm.
bless them and thank God for them.
Mm.
And so we can also say, who are we called
Mm-hmm.
to father, to mother beyond our own children,
Mm.
and pray for and invest in and care for in creative ways.
Mm.
And really, that is what Jesus, who's my mother, who's my brother, who's my sister. Really, every person in some ways in the image of God which is
Yeah.
everybody.
Yeah.
Um,
How do, there's as Jesus took on the 12, there's a lot of infighting of, the disciples are like, who's the greatest in the kingdom, who's going to be able to sit on the right hand of Jesus, and there all sorts of things of saying like, hey, look at me, I'm the best, you're the best, or you're not the best, and all sorts of things. As you're bringing groups of people together to mentor,
mhm, mhm.
um, how do you navigate those
Mhm.
group dynamics as everybody's on their own journey, but also on the journey with a group together?
Mhm. Mhm. Well, I do think in terms of group dynamics, the same thing with relationships. There's the honeymoon period, there's the maybe the easy, and then you hit the differences.
Yeah.
And really it's how you deal with the differences, and if you make it through is where you get to the deeper part where you've weathered it.
Yeah.
We had that in one group. It was really over a lot of sort of racial differences. It was not Meredith's group, another group, and we got to the point where beyond the being nice to each other, there were a few things that were said that were hurtful, that
Mm.
didn't understand that, and we had to have a pretty heart to heart and open conversation about what people are upset about, how they
Yeah.
had been offended. We had to ask forgiveness. We had to speak the truth in love.
Mm.
And when we did, I think we then entered. It's like a rocket ship. It takes off and then before it hits, relationships, have to go through that, and you have to know you can weather it
Yeah.
to get to another place where you're like, we're going to be able to weather things
Mm.
that are hard.
Mm.
So when that happens, it's not something to be surprised at or shocked about, but I think it is important to create the space
Mm.
for people to be safely heard.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think we have to do is slow down the discussion then,
Mm.
sort of one person at a time, and that person's heard, and then another person
Mm.
and they're heard.
Yeah.
Um, so it doesn't begin to be an escalating debate.
Mm. Yeah.
Um, but it's really in a small group. That's when the rubber meets the road, and you're like, whoop, here we
Yeah.
are. We're either gonna split apart or we're
Mm.
gonna navigate through.
Mm. I like what you said there, that it doesn't escalate into debate, but then if everybody's heard, then there's a dialogue happening, and we
Mhm.
actually can learn through dialogue with one another, because everybody's being heard. That means people are listening and taking in people's sides. If a debate is, I'm thinking about my argument and how to win my argument, and
Mhm.
so a lot of it is, it's really self-centered in a debate.
Mhm.
Um, so, the secret sauce to stay in dialogue and to not go over into debate?
Oh, well, you know what some groups do. I mean, the Native Americans, one of the things they start with is a talking stick.
Yeah,
I
that's
mean,
good.
if
Yep.
nothing else, you can say, whose turn is it?
Yeah.
But you can slow it down even more. You can put one person. One of the things we do in our group is each person, you're like, okay, we're going to hear you out until you're done.
Yeah. Hmm.
And you go, okay, your turn. All right, let's hear what's on your mind. And then you reflect it back, like, did we hear you?
Yeah.
And sometimes you'll say anything else, and you want to think they're done. But if you say anything else, I mean, think about that in your marriage. They'll go,
Yeah.
well, to tell you the truth, there are a few other things if you really want to hear. So I think giving one person full time to be heard
Mm.
and others to honor that and to thank them
Mm.
and to just hear it and reflect it before shifting to
Mm.
another person.
Mm.
Um,
That's
it's
good.
the slowing down and
Yeah.
really hearing each person, and the fact that each person has a perspective. And if we saw it the same way, we wouldn't have a conflict.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
the conflict says, whoa, we got something to learn here.
Yeah.
My husband, I mean, from the beginning, I was like, you think how? And he was like, you think how? Because he's from it's a very male perspective, and I had three sisters, and
Yeah.
we were peace at any price, and he was like, say whatever you have and shout it out. So it took a lot of slowing down and learning
Mm.
what's the other person's perspective.
Mm.
before you move on to yours.
Yeah, that's really good. Uh, what's one thing that Jesus is highlighting to you lately?
Actually, one thing Jesus is highlighting to me, my mother recently died
Hmm.
after a long life, a good life. This was not a tragedy. It was a holy dying after
Hmm.
many years of losing. But in the Apostles' Creed, we say, very quickly, I believe in the communion of saints.
Mm-hmm.
Like what? But when you have people on the other side, I've been pondering
Hmm.
the communion of saints. I've been thinking of Jesus and the transfiguration,
Hmm.
talking about Moses and Elijah. I've been aware that um, we have people who've gone before us who have a
Hmm.
lot to teach us and are
Hmm.
praying us, we're surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses.
Hmm.
And so Jesus is letting me know there's a cloud of witnesses and those who are praying me over, and that also there's a baton I'm handing on. I had a granddaughter who was just baptized. It's like, yes, this gospel is in the next 2 generations down. Hooray!
Hmm.
And realizing that I want to see that passion and energy in a next generation that might surpass me.
Yeah.
And so it's this, it's a beautiful communion of saints, past, present, to come, and how we are interwoven together into this tapestry. So that's one of the things actually I've been pondering in this Easter season.
Yeah.
And giving thanks for all the connections.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that. Two quick questions at the end. If you could go back to your 21-year-old self, what advice would you give?
I think for my 21-year-old self, I would say pay more attention to your cultivating your inner self than responding to every external need. Because I think that would help me, the person I've become. When I'm most fruitful, I think it's because I've grown into the person I was created to be more uniquely, rather than just responding to the external need or what other people said I ought to do.
Yeah.
So I think I would take that time to cultivate a little more of my inner quiet life to be more fruitful externally.
That's good. Anything you've been reading or watching lately you could recommend?
Well, I have a book that a friend just gave me. It was called Pilgrim Souls. It's a book of many saints, many people who've gone before. And it's just the example and the learnings from so many other people has been quite helpful. And I also, actually, I'm reading an old classic, Interior Castle by Teresa of Avila, which is this cultivation of the inner life with God. So it's the old classic, and people before. We have so much to learn from those who, from others around us.
Yeah.
Way before and currently. Just like I learned from even from this conversation and from Meredith when we gather, and isn't it great? We're in a larger community.
Yes, we
and
are.
All the listeners
That's
who are
right.
with us today.
I know, isn't that great? There's a lot of people that are here that are learning and growing, and who knows what seeds can multiply and grow even out of this conversation as people listen, and then they go out and they start to have some silence and solitude with God, and start to cultivate that listening arm and that listening time with Him, and the things that He's going to be able to share and say in the midst of it.
There's one thing that a friend of mine older than I challenged me to that made a huge difference in my life. She told me, go take a 24-hour silent retreat with God. And I had never done that, and I had no idea how to do it. And when I did, at first it was a little anxious and hard, but it became a source for me. So if anybody's listening and hasn't ever done that, go take 24 hours with Jesus, with God, and see what will happen to cultivate that best relationship of all.
Yeah. Well, I think that's great. Let's leave it at that. That's a great challenge. So, Anne, thank you so much. It was a privilege to talk to you, and what a pleasure it is. And so I really enjoyed the conversation. So thank you so much
Thank
for
you
coming
so
on.
much for having me, and thanks to all those who took their time to listen.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you for listening to the show today. If you're really enjoying the show, please don't forget to hit the follow button on your favorite podcast app. You could do it right now. Just hit that little plus. And then I would love it if you would leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. So you could go right now to the show and leave a star rating and review and let us know how you are enjoying the show. And find us on Facebook and Instagram. So if you want to connect, interact, I post a lot of quotes and different things that you could actually interact with the episodes and let me know how you are enjoying the show. If you feel inclined to donate, there is a support the show link in the show notes, and it would send you directly to a page where you could donate so that new episodes can be produced for your enjoyment. So thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have an incredible week.